The shuddering breath of a dying town greeted Katherine Kane as she stumbled down the dusty main street of Redemption, Colorado, in the summer of 1878. 3 days without food had left her dizzy, her once fine dress hanging like a scarecrow's garment on her diminished frame. She hadn't always been this desperate, this hollow-eyed woman with nothing but pride keeping her spine straight. A year ago, Katherine had been the respectable widow of a Denver banker. Then came the revelation that her late husband had gambled away their savings and left her with nothing but debts. The creditors had taken everything: the house, the furnishings, even her wedding band. All she had managed to salvage was a small locket containing a lock of her mother's hair and the dress on her back. She had traveled west, chasing rumors of work in mining towns, only to find that respectable jobs for women were scarce and the other kind were plentiful. Each town had been the same story until her funds ran out completely in this forgotten corner of the territory. As Katherine passed the town's only hotel, the smell of fresh bread wafted from the attached restaurant. Her stomach cramped so violently she had to stop walking, pressing one hand against the rough wooden wall to steady herself. Through the window, she could see people dining, carelessly leaving food on their plates. "Madam, you all right there?" A deep voice startled her from her hunger-induced trance. Katherine straightened immediately, smoothing her skirts with trembling hands. "Perfectly fine, thank you," she replied with as much dignity as she could muster, though her voice cracked from thirst. The man before her was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in the practical garb of a working cowboy, worn leather chaps over denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a dust-covered hat that he now held in his hands. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting he smiled often. Dark blonde hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes, a striking shade of green, studied her with concern. "Begging your pardon, but you don't look fine," he said gently. "You look like you could use a meal." Katherine's cheeks flushed with humiliation. "I am not seeking charity, sir," the cowboy nodded, respectful of her pride. "Name's Adam Zimmerman. I run cattle about 10 miles north of here, and I wasn't offering charity, madam. Just thought you might join me for dinner. I hate eating alone." "I don't need your pity," Katherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her vision swam and she swayed slightly. Adam stepped closer, ready to catch her if she fell. "No pity intended, just good company." Katherine's empty stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. The man pretended not to hear. She closed her eyes briefly, weighing her options. There weren't any. "I'll starve before I beg again," she vowed, more to herself than to him. The memory of her last desperate plea to a former friend and the cruel rejection that followed was still too raw. Adam nodded slowly, respecting her declaration. Then, without warning, he moved to a nearby bench and took a cloth-wrapped package from his saddlebag. He unwrapped it to reveal a loaf of bread and a small wedge of cheese. Breaking off a generous portion, he walked back to her and gently placed the bread in her lap. "Eat with me," he said simply. "Not charity, just two folks sharing a meal." Katherine stared at the bread, the aroma making her mouth water uncontrollably. Her hands moved of their own accord, bringing the bread to her lips. The first bite nearly brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered between careful, measured bites. Years of proper upbringing fought with ravenous hunger, and she forced herself to eat slowly. "May I ask your name, madam?" Adam inquired, breaking off a piece of bread for himself. "Katherine Kane," she replied after swallowing. "Mrs. Katherine Kane," a flicker of something disappointment crossed his face at the "Mrs.," but was quickly replaced by a friendly smile. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Kane. New to Redemption, just passing through," she answered vaguely. "Looking for work." Adam nodded thoughtfully. "What kind of work were you hoping to find?" Katherine hesitated. Her skills were limited to those of a banker's wife, managing household staff, planning dinner parties, maintaining social correspondence. None of which were particularly useful in a frontier town. "I can read and write well," she said finally. "I'm good with numbers, and I can sew." "The mercantile might need help," Adam suggested. "Old man Morris complains his ledgers are always a mess." He paused, seeming to consider something. And my ranch could use someone who can keep books straight. My foreman tries, but numbers aren't his strong suit. Katherine stiffened. I'm not looking for a position that requires living arrangements with a bachelor. Adam's eyes widened, and then he laughed, a warm sound that surprisingly didn't offend her. Mrs. Kane, I've got a bunkhouse full of cowboys who'd run me off my own land if I did anything improper. I was thinking you could stay in town and ride out a few times a week, or my housekeeper, Mrs. Perkins, has a spare room in her cottage if you preferred to stay at the ranch. The tension eased from Katherine's shoulders. I see, I apologize for jumping to conclusions. No apology needed. World's not always kind to women on their own. He offered her the wedge of cheese, which she accepted gratefully. As they continued to share the simple meal, Katherine found herself relaxing in Adam's company. There was something reassuring about his presence, a quiet strength that demanded nothing from her. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. Adam looked at her thoughtfully. 5 years ago, I rode into a town much like this one, broke and hungry after rustlers took my first herd. A stranger shared his meal with me, no questions asked, told me that's how folks survive out here, by helping each other through the hard times. Katherine nodded, understanding. The West was unforgiving, but its people could be surprisingly generous. I should warn you, Adam continued, I can't offer much pay at first. Ranch had a tough winter. Anything would be more than I have now, Katherine admitted. Then it's settled. You can start tomorrow if you like. For tonight, he hesitated. The hotel has clean rooms. I'd be happy to. No, Katherine interrupted firmly. I appreciate the work offer, Mr. Zimmerman, but I won't accept more charity today. Adam looked ready to argue, but seemed to recognize the determination in her eyes. There's an abandoned trapper's cabin just outside town. It's not much, but it's got a roof and 4 walls. No one would bother you there for a night. Katherine considered this. That would be acceptable, thank you. As dusk approached, Adam showed her to the cabin, bringing firewood and water from the creek. The small structure was dusty but sound, with a stone fireplace and a crude bed frame covered with old pine boughs. It's not the Ritz Hotel, Adam said apologetically. Katherine managed a small smile. I've slept in worse places this past year. Adam tipped his hat. I'll come by at sunrise if that suits you. We can ride out to the ranch together. After he left, Katherine sat on the edge of the bed, contemplating how quickly her fortunes had changed. From the brink of starvation to employment in the span of an hour, all because a kind stranger had offered bread without making her beg. She wondered about Adam Zimmerman. He wasn't like the other men she'd encountered in her travels, men who viewed a desperate woman as an opportunity. There was something genuine about him, something trustworthy. Katherine touched the small locket at her throat, her last connection to her previous life. What would you think of your daughter now, Mother? She whispered to the empty cabin. Accepting help from a stranger, preparing to work as a ranch bookkeeper. She could almost hear her mother's practical response, better than starving, my dear. With that thought, Katherine lay down on the rough bed and fell into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in months. True to his word, Adam appeared at dawn, mounted on a chestnut gelding and leading a gentle-looking mare. Morning, Mrs. Kane. This is Daisy. She's got an easy gait for those not used to riding. Katherine stepped out of the cabin, having done her best to make herself presentable with limited resources. She'd washed in the creek at first light and had pinned her dark hair into a simple bun. I should warn you, Mr. Zimmerman, that I haven't ridden in years. Adam smiled reassuringly. Daisy will take good care of you, and please call me Adam. The ride to the ranch took nearly 2 hours, during which Katherine learned about the Rocking Z Ranch. Adam had built it from nothing over 7 years, starting with just 20 head of cattle and a run-down line shack. Now he ran over 500 head on 8,000 acres. It's not the biggest spread in Colorado, he admitted, but it's all mine, free and clear. There was pride in his voice, not boastful but earned. Katherine found herself admiring his accomplishment. The ranch house came into view as they crested a small hill, a sturdy 2-story structure built of logs and local stone, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn, bunkhouse, and what appeared to be a small cottage set apart from the main house. "Mrs. Perkins will be pleased to have another woman around," Adam said, nodding toward the cottage. "She's been after me to hire more female staff for years." As if summoned by her name, a stout woman in her 60s emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray hair was pulled into a severe bun, but her face broke into a warm smile when she spotted Adam. "About time you got back. Breakfast is getting cold and your foreman's been pacing the porch for an hour waiting to talk to you about the north pasture fence." Her sharp eyes turned to Katherine. "And who might this be?" Adam dismounted and helped Katherine down from Daisy. "Mrs. Perkins, this is Mrs. Katherine Kane. She'll be helping with the books. Mrs. Kane, this is Edith Perkins, the woman who keeps this ranch from falling into complete chaos." Mrs. Perkins snorted at this description but extended a hand to Katherine. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Kane. Lord knows we need someone with a head for numbers around here." "Thank you for the welcome," Katherine replied, instantly liking the older woman's forthright manner. "Come inside, both of you." "You look like you could use a proper meal," Mrs. Perkins said, giving Katherine an appraising look that missed nothing about her condition. The kitchen was warm and inviting, with a large cast iron stove dominating one wall and a scarred oak table in the center. The scent of coffee, bacon, and fresh biscuits made Katherine's mouth water. A tall, weathered man rose from the table as they entered. "Boss, we've got trouble with—" He stopped short, noticing Katherine. "Jake, this is Mrs. Kane, our new bookkeeper," Adam said. "Mrs. Kane, this is Jake Miller, my foreman." Jake tipped his hat respectfully. "Madam." Over breakfast, Katherine listened as Adam and Jake discussed ranch business fences needing repair, a potential water rights dispute with a neighboring ranch, preparations for the upcoming cattle drive to Denver. She was struck by Adam's management style firm but fair, valuing Jake's opinion while making the final decisions himself. After the meal, Adam showed Katherine to a small room off the main parlor that served as the ranch office. Ledgers and papers were stacked haphazardly on every surface. "I warned you it was a mess," Adam said ruefully. Katherine surveyed the chaos with a critical eye. "I've seen worse. My husband's desk at the bank was legendary for its disorder." A shadow crossed Adam's face at the mention of her husband, but he recovered quickly. "I'll leave you to it then. Mrs. Perkins will show you to your room when you're ready to rest." For the next several hours, Katherine immersed herself in the ranch's financial records. The accounts weren't as bad as she'd feared. Adam kept track of major expenses and income, but the lack of organization was concerning. By mid-afternoon, she had a clearer picture of the ranch's situation. It was profitable, but cash flow was tight after a harsh winter had claimed more cattle than expected. A knock at the door interrupted her work. Mrs. Perkins entered carrying a tray with coffee and sandwiches. "Thought you might need sustenance," the housekeeper said, setting down the tray. "How bad is it?" Katherine smiled. "Not terrible. Mr. Zimmerman knows his business, even if his record-keeping needs improvement." Mrs. Perkins nodded approvingly. "He's a good man. Built all this from nothing after his parents died in that influenza outbreak back in '71. He was barely 20 then." "He mentioned he started with very little," Katherine said, accepting a cup of coffee gratefully. 20 head of scraggly cattle and more determination than sense," Mrs. Perkins confirmed. "Slept in the barn that first winter because the house wasn't built yet." She paused, studying Katherine. "What's your story, if you don't mind my asking?" "Not many proper ladies end up in these parts looking for work." Katherine hesitated, but something about Mrs. Perkins invited confidence. She gave a brief account of her husband's death, the discovery of his debts, and her subsequent struggles. Mrs. Perkins listened without interruption. When Katherine finished, she nodded thoughtfully. "Life's got a way of knocking us down just to see if we'll get back up. Seems to me you've done plenty of getting back up." "I haven't had much choice," Katherine admitted. "That's how it starts," Mrs. Perkins said with unexpected gentleness. "But after a while, you realize getting back up is its own kind of strength." That evening, Katherine joined the household for dinner. Besides Adam, Mrs. Perkins, and Jake, there were two younger cowboys who'd been working the North Range. The conversation flowed easily, centered mostly on ranch business and local gossip. Katherine found herself watching Adam when he wasn't looking. There was an ease to him here, surrounded by people who respected him, on land he'd built with his own hands. His laughter came readily, his green eyes crinkling at the corners, and more than once she caught herself smiling in response. Over the following weeks, Katherine settled into a routine at the Rocking Z. She brought order to the ranch's finances, creating systems for tracking expenses and income that even Jake could follow. She took her meals with the household and spent her evenings on the porch with Mrs. Perkins, learning to knit while the older woman shared stories of her 50 years on the frontier. Adam often joined them, whittling or simply watching the sunset over his land. Katherine grew accustomed to his presence, the scent of leather and pine that always seemed to surround him, the quiet strength in his calloused hands, the thoughtful way he listened when she spoke. She told herself it was gratitude. She felt appreciation for the man who had saved her from starvation and given her a chance to rebuild her life. But as spring turned to summer, Katherine could no longer deny that her feelings ran deeper. It was a Sunday afternoon in early July when things changed between them. Most of the ranch hands had ridden into town for their day off, and Mrs. Perkins was visiting her sister in the next county. Katherine had taken a book to read by the creek that ran through the south pasture. She was so absorbed in her novel that she didn't hear Adam approach until his shadow fell across the page. "Sorry to startle you," he said, smiling down at her. "Mind if I join you?" Katherine made room on the blanket she'd spread beneath a cottonwood tree. "Not at all." Adam sat beside her, stretching his long legs out before him. "What are you reading?" Katherine showed him the cover. "Wuthering Heights." Mrs. Perkins had it in her bookshelf. "Any good?" "It's rather tragic, actually, about people who love each other but can't seem to find happiness together." Adam was quiet for a moment. "Seems to me that people make things more complicated than they need to be." Katherine glanced at him. "How so?" "Well, if you love someone, you should tell them. Life's too short for anything else." There was something in his voice that made Katherine's heart beat faster. "Sometimes it's not that simple. There are complications." Adam turned to face her directly. Like being a widow still wearing her wedding ring, Katherine's hand went instinctively to the plain gold band she still wore. It wasn't her original wedding ring that had been taken by creditors, but a simple band she'd purchased to protect herself from unwanted attention during her travels. "I haven't worn it out of grief for some time," she admitted softly. "Why then?" "Protection at first, a woman traveling alone." She didn't need to elaborate, and then habit, I suppose, and perhaps fear. Adam's eyes held her steadily. "What are you afraid of, Katherine?" It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver through her. "Losing myself again," she whispered. "With James, my husband, I became what he wanted, the perfect banker's wife. I lost sight of who I was." Adam nodded slowly. "And who are you, Katherine Kane?" The question caught her off guard. Who was she now? Not the pampered society wife she'd been in Denver. Not the desperate, starving woman who'd stumbled into redemption 3 months ago. "I'm still figuring that out," she answered honestly. Adam smiled, a gentle curve of his lips that made her breath catch. "I like who you're becoming, strong, independent, not afraid to speak your mind. Even when I'm telling you that your cattle vaccination expenses are too high," she teased, trying to lighten the suddenly charged atmosphere between them. "Especially then," he laughed. Then his expression grew serious again. "Katherine, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." She nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "Are you staying?" Here at the ranch, Katherine hadn't allowed herself to think too far ahead. The past year had taught her the danger of making plans. "I hadn't considered leaving," she said carefully. "That's not what I asked." Katherine took a deep breath. "Yes, I'm staying if you want me to." "If I want," Adam broke off, shaking his head with a rueful smile. "Katherine, I've wanted you to stay since the moment I put that bread in your lap and saw the determination in your eyes, even when you were half-starved." Before she could respond, he reached out and gently took her left hand, his thumb brushing over the gold band. "Would you consider taking this off?" not for me but for yourself, to mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another." Katherine looked down at their joined hands, as tanned and calloused from years of ranch work, hers paler but no longer as soft as they'd once been. Slowly, she slipped the ring from her finger and placed it in her pocket. "A new chapter," she agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. Adam's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "May I kiss you, Katherine Kane?" Instead of answering, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened as years of loneliness and longing gave way to newfound hope. When they finally parted, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for about 12 weeks now," Katherine laughed softly. "That long, since you sat up straight as a poker and told me you weren't seeking charity, even though you were about to faint from hunger." The memory no longer stung as it once had. "I was rather stubborn, wasn't I?" "You still are," Adam said fondly. "It's one of the things I love about you." The word hung between them, neither ready to acknowledge it directly but both feeling its truth. As summer turned to fall, Katherine and Adam's relationship deepened. They worked side by side during the day, she managing the books while he ran the ranch, and spent their evenings talking about everything from books to politics to their hopes for the future. Katherine discovered parts of herself she'd never known existed: strength, resilience, and a capacity for joy she'd thought lost forever. Mrs. Perkins watched their growing attachment with approving eyes, though she wasn't above teasing them mercilessly. "About time this place had a proper mistress," she told Katherine one evening as they prepared dinner. "That boy's been alone too long." The cattle drive to Denver in late September marked a turning point. With most of the hands gone for 2 weeks, the ranch was quieter than usual. Katherine found herself spending more time with Adam, helping with chores normally handled by others. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Adam took her hand. "I've been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. Katherine smiled encouragingly. "That sounds dangerous," he chuckled. "Maybe it is." His expression grew serious. "Katherine, when I found you in Redemption, I was just trying to help someone in need. I never expected to find the other half of my soul." Her breath caught at the raw emotion in his voice. "I love you," he continued. "I love your strength, your intelligence, your kindness. I love how you face each day with determination, no matter what life throws at you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "I'm not asking you to be my bookkeeper anymore." Katherine's eyes widened as he opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "I'm asking you to be my wife, my partner, the person I build a future with." Adam looked into her eyes, vulnerability and hope mingled in his gaze. "Will you marry me, Katherine?" Tears welled in Katherine's eyes as memories flashed through her mind, the desperate hunger that had driven her to Redemption, the simple act of kindness that had saved her life, the months of rebuilding her strength and sense of self. And through it all, Adam's steady presence, never demanding, always supporting. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Adam Zimmerman." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, the same finger that had once borne a symbol of her past, now adorned with a promise for her future. The wedding took place on a crisp October day, with the aspen trees glowing gold against the blue Colorado sky. The entire ranch turned out for the celebration, along with townspeople from Redemption who had come to know and respect the couple. Katherine wore a simple dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Perkins had helped her make, with her mother's locket at her throat and wildflowers in her hair. Adam couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him in the meadow where they had shared their first kiss. The circuit preacher who performed the ceremony spoke of partnership, of two people choosing to face life's challenges together. As Katherine and Adam exchanged vows, she thought of how far she had come from that day in Redemption, from a woman ready to starve rather than beg, to a woman strong enough to accept help, and finally to a woman capable of building a new life on her own terms. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." Adam cupped Catherine's face gently in his hands. "No more starving," he whispered for her ears alone. "No more begging, just us sharing everything for all our days." As their lips met, sealing their promise to each other, Catherine knew she had found not just security or comfort, but true partnership with a man who valued her exactly as she was. The celebration lasted well into the night, with dancing and feasting under the stars. As midnight approached, Adam led Catherine away from the revelry and back to the main house, their home now, together. On the porch he paused, looking out over the land that had once represented his solitary dream and now held the promise of their shared future. "Happy, Mrs. Zimmerman?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. Catherine leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "You know," Adam said thoughtfully, "when I saw you that day in town, something told me my life was about to change forever." Catherine turned in his arms to face him. "When you placed that bread in my lap," he shook his head, smiling. "No, before that. When you said you'd starve before begging again, I knew then you were someone special, someone with a spirit that couldn't be broken, only bent for a while." "And now?" she asked, her hands resting on his chest. Adam's eyes, warm in the lamplight spilling from the window, held a promise that made her heart swell. "Now we make sure neither of us ever has to face hunger or hardship alone again." As they crossed the threshold into their home, Katherine Kane Zimmerman silently thanked the twist of fate that had brought her, starving and desperate, to a dusty street in redemption, and to the man who had offered bread without demanding she beg, who had seen her worth when she'd forgotten it herself, and who now offered a lifetime of partnership built on mutual respect and love. She had lost everything once, only to find something far more precious, not just survival, but a life truly worth living. And it had all begun with a simple act of kindness, bread shared between strangers who would become, against all odds, each other's redemption.